Hello there, welcome to this game review. In this one we will talk a bit about opening principles and later about endgames, but mainly about how to develop the pieces in the opening, what our goals are, and how we can improve in the future. So the opening is a race. It's a race to see whose pieces will get developed first, and whoever develops all their pieces first can be the one to start striking in the center or on the flanks to open up the position and just when the opponent's pieces are not going to be ready. So let's see what went wrong in this game. To d4, d5. So far everything is quite fine. Black is developing the pieces. c5. So already c5 is maybe a bit ambitious, but okay, this is fine. Knight c6 castles. And at the moment we can already see that white has a bit more pieces developed. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The king and the rook are developed, as developing the king in the opening means putting it in the corner, and the rook is out of the corner as well. So white has 5 pieces developed, while we have 3. So currently we are a bit behind, but it's okay because it's our move and we can play bishop e7, castles, and we're not behind by too much, so we can finish development quite quickly. But now knight e4 is played, and this is a mistake because, well, firstly, it doesn't really achieve anything specific. It doesn't create any threats. And the black is breaking the opening principle, which says that we should not move around the same piece twice in the opening for no reason, because instead of moving the piece that is developed, we can improve our position a lot more by developing something that is not developed. So bishop e7 would have been better. But now after knight e4, knight b3, bishop takes f3. So here, this is kind of a more of a positional mistake. Black gives up the bishop for a knight for no reason, and generally bishops are better than knights in chess. So if we give up our bishop for a knight, we should have a good reason for doing this. And now, as you can see, black has only 2 pieces developed, as he has gotten rid of one of his developed pieces, and the white has 4. And now black starts opening up the position, which will not be beneficial to him, as he has less pieces in the game. Knight d4. And now probably black doesn't really have time to develop anymore. For example, bishop e7. White can, for example, take. Black can take back. Queen c2. Now we have some problems on this diagonal. For example, if f5, then white can continue developing with tempo. And there will be a lot of problems here. We will soon probably lose a pawn. Also, our king is weakened. There is a weakness on e6. And all this happened because we did not have time to finish our development. Or at least we did not try to finish development. So here black castles queenside, which makes sense to develop as quickly as possible. But unfortunately now this is not ideal because our king is very weak on the open c file. There will be only 2 pawns around our king, while the opponent has 4 pawns around his king. And in chess, king safety is extremely important, and ours is not very good. Not to mention, now that we have given up our light square bishop, the opponent has a very strong bishop that will be pointing on this very fruitful diagonal. Queen c2, f5, we must defend the knight, and knight takes c6, but this gives black at least some time to develop. By that I mean that after queen takes c6, white is not in time to somehow finish their development and attack us, so they will have to settle for only a small positional advantage by exchanging everything and ruining our pawns. So in this position, now that the queens are off the board, our king safety is not that bad, but again, we are struggling with development. We have no rook in the game, we have no bishop in the game, and black tries to solve this with g5, but this loses time because after bishop to b2, which was to be expected, black cannot answer with bishop g7. Instead, black could have already finished development with bishop b2, after bishop e7, bishop b2, and bishop f6, not losing time. If the bishops get traded, now this rook endgame is quite fine for black. He has the open file, he can go to d2, the pawn on c6 is not very weak, the king can defend it, and black has a lot of easy moves, for example rook d5 and the rook d8. For example, this would be a nice idea to double the rooks on the d file, and if white ever takes, we can improve our structure. So this would have been an easy way to finish development. But after g5, bishop b2, Again, we are not developed and white is creating some kind of threats. And c5 is played, trying to not lose this pawn. But unfortunately c5 is not going to work because of the simple rook ac1. And perhaps c5 would have been a good move if the opponent was forced to retreat with his bishop. But we have to change our mindset as to what happens when we attack a piece or when our piece is attacked. The first instinct is, of course, to move the piece. Similarly, when we attack a piece, we think that our opponent will move it. But the most important part of chess is to not lose the initiative and think, what can I attack? And how can I play actively instead of moving the attack piece? And the opponent, turns out, can pin this pawn, and we're going to lose a pawn. So b4, e5, but this doesn't really help. a4, king b7, rook c5, and here black plays rook g2, d8, which makes sense, but unfortunately now we are going to get a lost rook endgame, and the reason it's lost is because we are down a pawn, and also our structure is very bad, and white will be able to activate their rook to pick up all of these pawns. So instead, we should have taken on c5 to at least have some kind of target, for example like this, and now we can either play king c6 or something like rook c8, but mainly king c6. Our plan can be to take this pawn, then take this one, and then create a passed pawn. Of course, our pawns are quite bad, but they're still on the board. Instead, this happens, and now white is winning, but of course, some stuff can happen, and here white could play g4, which is kind of a strange move, not really doing anything. The most important part about rook endgames is to get the active rook, and white's rook is of course active, but it's not really doing anything specific. It could go and start taking pawns. If white can take these two pawns, he will have two connected passed pawns on the g and h files, and that should win the game automatically. But g4 is kind of a waste of time, and black plays e4, which is also kind of a waste of time. Again, not activating the rook. Our first priority should always be to get the rook as active as possible. And here there are several ways to do this, the most obvious being rook d3. For example, if white defends this pawn, we can go pick up these pawns. This pawn is also loose, the pawn on a4 is loose. If we pick up both of these pawns, we will have a passed pawn on the a file. The engine also suggests a5, which is also an interesting idea, threatening this pawn. If white takes, we can take back, and this pawn cannot be saved, after which white will also have to defend this one, so a lot of pawns are getting off the board. Otherwise, if b5, then we can play, for example, rook d3, rook a3, pick up this pawn, and our passed pawn will be quite dangerous in the future. But e4 kind of doesn't really achieve anything, it just kind of wastes a move. Now after rook e7, we even lose this pawn, and this rook will be very well placed on e4 to defend all the weaknesses. So now we are down two pawns, so our position is more or less hopeless, but of course anything can happen in chess. And let's see what happens here. At the moment, we get this pawn endgame where white is two pawns ahead, one pawn ahead. They have two passed pawns, but here they did not find the correct way to win the game. And here, to win the game, white should have just ran to pick up this pawn, because black will not be able to pick up both of these pawns. And this is also a bit instructive, as there is an important pawn endgame pattern to know. For example, here, let's say a4, king c4, king e6. Here, if white just goes to pick up the pawn, black will pick up this one, and at the end of this, he will get in front of the pawn. So this is not the way to play for white. But the correct way to play here is e4, with the idea that now, if king e5, this pawn actually cannot be taken, because then g6 would happen, and white would get a queen. Otherwise, if black tries to take this pawn, then it's very important here for white to play e5. As if he goes here, then again king g6, black gets in front of the pawn and picks it up, or at least doesn't get a lost endgame. So here, white would have to play e5. The reason is, again, with these two pawns, if black tries to pick up this one, then after g6, the king is kind of frozen and it cannot pick up this pawn. because this one will go. And again, if here, king b4 here, then at this point king a4 wins, but the most simple is e6. Again, with the same idea. If here, then e7, the king is dominated. If here, then g7. And so black cannot pick up either one of these pawns. So this is an important pattern to note in pawn endgames. These two pawns, when they're split by one file, they can go by themselves as long as they're close by horizontally. When set king f6, white tries to create one of the queens, but black also has their counterplay, and black is first to queen, exchanges the queens and king e6, and in front of the pawn, king against king, game over. So quite an interesting game. Black got himself in a lot of trouble in the opening because he did not abide by the opening principles, moving around the knight many times instead of finishing development, and later got in trouble because he did not develop the last pieces, and playing g5 kind of lost a lot of time because the opponent got to develop their bishop as well. So hopefully this was useful. Hopefully in the future openings that you play, you will try to develop as quickly as possible.